Picture this. You're sitting alone in a quiet room. The lights are dim, the noise of the world silenced for a moment, and yet something loud remains an echo, not in the air, but in you. It doesn't speak in words. It breathes in memories, heavy ones, moments that broke you, disappointments that rewrote how you see yourself, people who left wounds without touching you, events that ended but never really left. Now ask yourself this: who would you be without all that pain? It's a terrifying question, isn't it? Because for so long, that pain became your map, your explanation for your reactions, your isolation, your fears, your identity. You've spent years surviving it, naming it, understanding it, and in the process, maybe you began to become it. But what if your trauma, while real and profound, is not your truth? What if the story that was done to you isn't the same as the one you were meant to write? There's a strange comfort in clinging to our wounds. They give shape to chaos. They offer justification for why we hide, why we lash out, why we don't trust. Of course I am this way, we say. Look what happened to me. We wear it like armor, or worse, like skin. But what if the very thing that kept you safe for so long is now what's keeping you small? What if trauma, when left unchallenged, becomes a cage with invisible bars, one that feels like home simply because it's familiar? What if, instead of being a scar that proves you healed, it became a mask you forgot how to take off? And deeper still, what if the more you identify with your trauma, the less room there is for who you actually are? You see, there's a paradox here. To heal, you must face your wounds. But if you stare too long, they start to define you. You confuse the mirror with the reflection. You begin to mistake survival patterns for personality traits. The trauma becomes the author, and you forget that you were always meant to be the pen. So, here's the haunting question. Who are you beneath what broke you? Not who they made you, not what life did to you, but who you were before the storm, and who you still are beneath the rubble. Are you willing to find out? Are you brave enough to peel back the story that's been running your life and ask if it's even true anymore? Because the truth is waiting. And the next part of this journey isn't about reliving the pain. It's about reclaiming your name from it. Let's go deeper. Let's find the hidden roots of this quiet identity theft. Let's pull back the curtain. If trauma isn't your identity, why does it feel so fused to who you are? Because somewhere along the way, perhaps in childhood, or during one shattering experience, you learned that being broken got you seen, that pain had currency, that wounds meant worth, and over time, without realizing it, you started to trade your voice for your victimhood. Psychologically, this isn't just poetic, it's wired into your brain. When you experience trauma, your nervous system encodes not just as memory, but as a survival blueprint. The amygdala, the fear center of your brain, remembers what hurt you. The hippocampus stores context, and the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, gets hijacked. Over time, these neural imprints don't just influence your choices, they become them. You flinch at intimacy because love once came with pain. You silence your opinions because being loud once meant danger. You doubt your value because someone long ago made you feel disposable. But here's the philosophical trap. The brain doesn't distinguish between what happened to you and what you are. The voice of trauma becomes internalized, then mistaken for your own. And in that confusion, identity is quietly rewritten. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about that. What if the version of you walking through life, the cautious one, the self-sabotaging one, the one who feels undeserving of peace, isn't the real you, but the trauma-trained you? You didn't choose that identity. It was assigned to you by pain, and yet you wear it like it's your birthright. Now, let's dig deeper. The existentialists knew this dilemma intimately. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with a fixed identity, but must create it. Yet trauma often inverts this truth. It makes you believe your essence has already been decided by your past, by your parents, by that one night, that one betrayal. Schopenhauer, ever bleak, would have argued that suffering is the essence of life. But Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, offered a radical rebuttal. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Your trauma does not eliminate that space, but it does try to convince you that it isn't there. And modern psychology, it's catching up. Therapists now understand how trauma can manifest as parts of the self-adaptations that served a purpose once, but are now outdated. Inner child, protector, rebel, people pleaser, each formed to keep you safe. But survival strategies don't make a life. And safety isn't the same as freedom. Trauma isn't just something that happened. It becomes something you carry. It rewrites your relationship with love, with fear, with yourself. But it's not you. It's your response to something you never asked for. So, here's the hidden problem. We live in a world that glorifies resilience, but rarely teaches release. A society that tells you to own your story, but doesn't show you how to stop it from owning you. You are applauded for surviving, but left alone when it comes time to transform. And without transformation, survival can become stagnation. You cling to your pain because it's the only proof you existed when no one was watching. You replay the story because it's the only language your nervous system still speaks. But beneath all that, there's something else, isn't there? A quiet whisper beneath the noise, a sense that you were more before the world taught you to be less. You're not broken, you're layered. You're not your wounds, you're the one who survived them. And survival is not identity, it's a bridge, one you were never meant to build a house on. So let's go further. Let's look at what happens when this quiet confusion between trauma and self begins to ripple outward into relationships, into society, into the soul. You wake up one morning, brush your teeth, check your phone, and without knowing it, step back into a story you didn't choose. Not because you want to, but because it's safer, familiar, a well-worn costume that fits so tightly, you've forgotten it was ever meant to come off. That's the first consequence, invisibility disguised as protection. When trauma becomes identity, you don't just wear the past, you become its ghostwriter. You silence your needs to avoid being a burden. You shrink in conversations to avoid rejection. You chase validation to outrun your own self-doubt. And every day, this invisible choreography continues unnoticed by the world, but deeply felt by your soul. What's even more insidious is this: you're rewarded for it. Society has learned to praise pain when it's polished. If you can package your trauma into productivity, brand it as resilience, or monetize your healing, you're seen as inspirational. But bleed too honestly, grieve too long, question too loudly, and suddenly, you're too much. So, you learn to compartmentalize. You smile while bleeding. You perform your pain instead of processing it. You curate a version of yourself that's palatable to others, even if it starves the real you in the process. But the cost? Identity erosion. Each compromise chips away at who you are underneath the survival. And slowly, a subtle despair sets in, the despair of being seen, but not known. Neurologically, this is no small matter. Your brain operates in patterns. When you reinforce thoughts like "I am broken," "I am not enough," or "this is who I've always been," you strengthen those neural pathways. It's like carving a groove into your psyche, and every time you walk the same route, it deepens. Before long, it's not just a habit, it's a trench, a mental prison. And trauma doesn't stay self-contained. It leaks into relationships, where you mistake control for safety or silence for peace. Into love, where you anticipate abandonment before intimacy can breathe. Into ambition, where you chase success not from passion, but to prove you're not worthless. Into parenting, where you overcorrect, overprotect, or unknowingly repeat what was done to you. You see, when you mistake your trauma for your identity, you unintentionally pass it on. Not just genetically, but energetically. And the greatest tragedy, you start to believe that pain is the only place you belong, that healing means betrayal of your past, of your ancestors, of the self you had to become just to survive. So you self-sabotage. You choose partners who reflect your wounds. You push away people who love you differently. You fear peace because it feels unfamiliar. Here's a sobering truth. The nervous system doesn't crave happiness. It craves what's familiar. And if pain is familiar, it will seek it even if it destroys you. But there's more. Culturally, we've built institutions on trauma. Entire economies revolve around your sense of not being whole. Beauty industries thrive on your shame. Productivity culture rewards your burnout. Social media magnifies your comparison wounds. And algorithms are engineered to keep you chasing what you already are. The system doesn't want you to heal, because a healed person is dangerous, unmarketable, uncontrollable, and afraid. So ask yourself, what would it mean to live outside the algorithms of pain? To stop being a brand of your trauma and become a human again. To let go of being the strong one and start being the real one. What does life look like beyond survival? Here's the final paradox. You've built an identity on pain not because you're weak, but because it was intelligent. It kept you alive, but now it's keeping you small. And maybe it's time to grieve not just what happened to you, but who you had to become because of it. That grief uncomfortable, honest is the beginning of liberation. Because once you mourn the false self, the real one has space to rise. And it does rise, not through force, but through surrender. Not by erasing your past, but by integrating it on your terms. So, what does it actually look like to break free? To live without identifying with the wound? What if the greatest act of rebellion isn't loud or violent but quiet, internal, and radical? Imagine this. One morning, instead of performing the version of you that everyone expects, the strong one, the silent one, the survivor, you just stop. You sit in the stillness, stripped of all armor, and you ask the most dangerous question of all. Who am I without my pain? At first, there's nothing but silence, no clear answers, just echoes. But within that silence, something sacred begins to stir possibility. This is the rebellion, not the denial of your trauma, but the refusal to let it own you. It begins with the smallest shift, a conscious decision to observe your thoughts rather than obey them. When the voice in your head whispers, "You'll always be broken," you pause. You don't fight it or believe it, you just recognize it. Like watching an old movie you've seen too many times. You realize that voice isn't truth. It's a relic, a ghost, and you don't have to keep feeding it. This is metacognition, awareness of thought, and it's the first crack in the shell of trauma identity. Then comes something deeper, reparenting yourself. You start showing up for the younger versions of you who were ignored, abandoned, or abused. You speak to them gently. You listen. You create the safety they never had. This isn't regression, it's integration. As Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." But how do you choose to become something else when the past clings like smoke? By questioning the lies it taught you. That love must be earned, that peace is conditional, that safety requires control, that vulnerability equals weakness. These are the internalized mantras of trauma. And to break them, you don't need motivation, you need truth. Counterintuitive, uncomfortable truth. Like this. Sometimes, healing doesn't look like joy. It looks like rage finally expressed, grief finally honored, silence finally allowed. It looks like setting boundaries and being called selfish. It looks like resting when your worth was built on productivity. It looks like disappointing others to remain loyal to yourself. Freedom, it turns out, is messy. Not the sanitized Instagram version, but the real, gritty kind. It's Viktor Frankl sitting in a concentration camp and discovering that between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space lies our power to choose. It's Jean-Paul Sartre proclaiming that we are condemned to be free not because freedom is easy, but because it strips us of excuses. It's the quiet revolution of saying, "I will no longer let the worst thing that happened to me define the rest of my life." So, how do you reclaim your narrative? You stop telling the old one, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by telling it differently. Not I am damaged, but I was wounded and I survived. Not I'll never trust again, but I'm learning to discern who is safe. Not I'm unlovable, but I've outgrown those who couldn't love me well. Language matters, because every time you speak, you either reinforce your prison or build your path to freedom. And let's talk about the body, because trauma isn't just stored in your mind, it's etched into your nervous system. That's why talk alone doesn't heal. You need movement, breath, touch, stillness, practices that speak the language of the body. Somatic healing isn't a trend. It's an uprising of the self from the depths of the subconscious. Breathing deeply is defiance. Crying without shame is a revolution. Feeling joy without guilt is a rebellion. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is soul reclamation. You are not healing to become someone new. You are healing to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Before trauma taught you to shrink. Before fear told you to hide. Before pain convinced you to perform. And yes, it's hard. It's terrifying to let go of a survival identity that once kept you safe. But here's the truth. Safety and aliveness are not the same, and only one of them leads to freedom. So let the old self die. Let the false narratives fall away. Let the world call it selfish, dramatic, confusing. Because what you're doing, it's not selfish. It's sacred. You are not rejecting your past, you're releasing its grip. You are not dishonoring your pain, you're refusing to worship it. And for the first time, you're breathing as you, not the mask, not the role, not the trauma. But this journey doesn't end here. Here's the ultimate truth that reframes everything. Are you ready? What if everything you believed about yourself, your limitations, your fears, your pain was built on a single illusion? Not that your trauma didn't happen, but that it defines you. Imagine this. You're walking through a house built during a storm. Every wall, every door, every decision was made not for beauty or comfort, but for survival. The roof slopes awkwardly because the wind was too strong. The windows are tiny, not for light, but to block the rain. For years, you've called this place home. You've memorized the layout, decorated the cracks. But one day, the storm stops, and for the first time, you realize the house doesn't fit the sky anymore. This is the moment of truth. You are not the house. You are the sky. The trauma-built self, the one built from defense, shame, fear. That self is not false, but it is incomplete. It's the scaffolding, not the structure, a chrysalis, not a cage. You were never meant to stay there. The final and most powerful realization is this. Healing is not becoming someone new. It's remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. Before the abuse, before the betrayal, before the silence, before the world convinced you that your worth was conditional. This is not poetic sentiment. This is neurological, emotional, spiritual fact. Underneath the trauma responses, beneath the fear-based beliefs, is something unshattered, a core self untouched by what happened. Call it soul, call it essence, call it the imago Dei, the image of the divine. You've spent years identifying with your wound, but what if the wound was simply a doorway? What if its entire purpose was to take you deeper, not into suffering but into meaning, not into victimhood but into vision, not into resentment but into radical self-knowing? This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he said that those who have a why to live can bear almost anyhow. The pain isn't meaningless. It's a brutal teacher, but it doesn't deserve the final word. You do. And here's where the shift becomes sacred. You realize you don't have to hate your trauma to transcend it. You can honor the version of you that endured. You can love the scared child who adapted. You can even thank the coping mechanisms that once kept you alive. Even as you release them now, forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering differently, from survival to sovereignty. So you stand now not as a broken thing trying to be whole, but as a whole being reclaiming every broken piece. Not to return to who you were before the pain, but to become who you were meant to be because of it. And in this new vision, identity is not built from scars, it's built from what endured despite them. Love, courage, curiosity, Compassion, the quiet fire that kept flickering even in your darkest nights. You begin to see that your trauma is not a story to hide but one to reauthor. That you are not here to repeat your pain but to interrupt the pattern. You stop asking, "What did this trauma do to me?" and start asking, "What is trying to emerge from it?" This is what Joseph Campbell described in The Hero's Journey. Not a quest to destroy the dragon, but to discover the treasure it was guarding all along. Your treasure is your truth, and your truth is this: you were never your trauma. You were always the one who survived it, and now you are the one who transcends it. So breathe deeply, boldly. The storm is over, the walls are gone, and your sky is waiting, not for who you were, but for who you are finally becoming.